No, here we go. We are live,
Oh,
or we should be. Uh, Maybe there is a delay because I can see it in the. There we go. You see it?
oh, yeah. Oh, there's an advert's come on.
Why is there an advert?
Yay! I can see us. Hey, there is a delay. We're in the past.
There's a little bit of a delay. Okay. Let's go. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Wait, something fell. Oh no, this is terrible. I don't know what to do anymore. See, this is why, guys. This is why. Now here we are being all like, now I don't know what to do. Where's
2
my
seconds
drink?
into the first joint, we've already blown it.
We're so sorry, everyone. This is what happens. I swear I pulled out a drink and now I don't know where it is. Oh, well, I'm just going to have to go without it while we're talking about this. That's what I get. Oh, there it is. I see it. It's under my chair. Okay, here we go. All right. Welcome everyone to the Comics Cube. It's our first live stream. And we are talking about Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man from 1978, the first ever DC versus Marvel crossover. And I am Duy of the Comics Cube. You can find me at Comics Cube on Twitter and on Facebook. It's at the Comics Cube on Instagram and on YouTube. I am joined by Paul at Paul G. Cornish on Twitter, and LaMar, who is not on Twitter, so therefore no screen name for you, LaMar, over there. What's up, guys?
Oh, good. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, everything's straight now, I hope.
So thank you guys for joining me on this pilot run for live streaming on the Comics Cube. All right. Let's talk about this comic, Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man, 1978. Ross Andru on art, Gerry Conway on script. When did you guys first find out about this particular comic? Let's start with you, LaMar.
When did I first find out about it? This is probably, I don't know, maybe around, and I was young. I don't think I was in school yet. So you're probably talking like 82, 83. And I went into it was a yard sale. It wasn't a flea market. I apologize. But the cover was missing and the opening marquee page was missing. So what I ended up doing was it was the front cover where not the front cover, the front like 2-page spread. And it's awesome. It's Superman flying in, and there's this giant robot like tearing up a building. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, gotta have it. And I paid what was the going rate for it at the time? I don't even think I paid 10 cents for it. I think I paid a nickel because the cover was missing. But yeah, that was it. And it was on and popping from there, you know.
You got it off the basis of being a Superman comic.
Yes. Yeah, and just the dynamics of the page, I just was like, because it was a Superman comic I had never seen, so I had no real sense of time with it. So any Superman comic that I'd never seen was a new Superman comic. You know, I mean, I was only 3 years old. You know what I mean? So I had to have it. You know.
Of course. And Paul, you have the original as well.
I do, yeah. This was a gift that I got a few years ago from someone who I'm very, very grateful to. But it's not when I first encountered the story. That was in this collection here. That
Same.
I bought. Yeah, there we go. I bought this when I was about 10. And as you can imagine, to a 10-year-old, this is like the greatest book you're ever gonna read. Like, this is like the most exciting thing that ever happened to me in my life, getting this book.
Crossover classics. I love that cover.
Yeah, it's George Perez cover
by George. Yeah.
Yeah, and the back's great as well. It's got all the baddies on it, and Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, and the first story in it is the crossover we're talking about, Superman, Spider-Man. I just remember, like we had to draw pictures of our favorite book in school, and and everyone else chose a real book, and I drew pictures from this.
I mean, why would you not? Paul?
Exactly. Yeah.
Also, points off for calling it not a real book.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
That's also when I first read it, but it's not somehow how I first discovered it. I don't remember how. I feel like I saw it in an ad or something. Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man. I feel like I saw it in an ad, but of course it's not how I read it. I first read it in that collection as well. And I don't know what happened to it. We lost that collection. I got the reprint later on without the cool background, but yet same figures, you know? That's a very 90s-ish Spider-Man right there, by the way.
Yeah.
Very 90s Spider-Man. Very cool collection. It has Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man and Superman, Batman versus the Incredible Hulk, and what seems to be everyone's favorite, the New Teen Titans and the Uncanny X-Men. But my favorite is Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man, because that is it has pretty much at the time, and maybe now, my two favorite superheroes. So let's get on with the story. Actually, before we get on with the story, let's talk about the cover of this book. Paul, can you flash that cover? Okay, designed, laid out by Carmine Infantino, art director of DC Comics at the time, I believe editor-in-chief of DC Comics at the time, and drawn by Ross Andru, and famously or infamously penciled over by Neil Adams. And I believe that John Romita Sr. also had a hand in some of the Peter Parker scenes. So that cover, what do you think of it? Because I think it's one of the greatest covers of all time.
Absolutely, it's really fantastic, and I don't know if you had this in your collection, Duy, but there's like the first drafts, and this was like one of the first times I ever saw anything like this when I was a kid. So this is absolutely fascinating. I love how they considered at one point just having Superman in the foreground really big, Spider-Man really little. I don't know why they thought that would fly. But yeah,
it's an interesting look into what goes into the making of a cover like this, because of course there's politics involved, right? The two of them should occupy the same amount of space. That first one that you showed doesn't have both of them in full figure.
Yeah.
Which now that I think of it, is actually really uncommon. Like, not having them in full figure is just really uncommon in general.
Yeah.
In covers, right? Am I wrong here? No? Okay.
Well, in good covers.
But then that second one where it's just a giant figure of Superman, that's hilarious, man. LaMar, what do you think of the cover?
I think that the cover, which I obviously I saw it secondhand. I didn't see it till much later, but it's interesting because the angle of it is at a tilt, and you kind of have to do that because of just the power sets of Spider-Man and Superman. So, how do you depict? It's kind of a I don't know. We don't really think about it now because most of the covers now are just people like standing around, or like everybody's in a heap and somebody's in the middle after the person's obviously beat the crap out of him or something. But it's like back then, and this is in the 70s for people who haven't seen it, but people would always think about, okay, how can I have both of these characters using their powers, right? So, obviously Superman's flying because that's like his signature thing but Spider-Man's is a little more difficult. Like, what do you do? So they have Superman flying, coming around, and Spider-Man's using his powers. He's basically holding on to a building with his feet, right? So, but it's really graceful the way they did it. It's not like a, so it's just the two of them in the front, full figure, and then you have the building that Spider-Man is on, and Superman swooshing around him with the city behind him. And it just makes you want to go like, oh man, what's about to happen next? Which is what a cover's supposed to do. Like, it's supposed to make you want to read the book. So as soon as I saw the cover, I was like, oh wow, I wish I had it when I got mine. You know what I mean? But it's just an amazing cover. The composition of it and the use of negative space in the background and everything is just amazing, with all of the detail like up front. You know, it's just like, it would be amazing even if it didn't have the lettering on the top and things like that. Just the image itself is just amazing. Yeah, it's one of my favorites, definitely. It's one of the greatest covers I've ever seen. And people have tried to like redo it, but it's just one of those things that I don't know. It's not the same when they try it with other characters and stuff.
Yeah, Ross Andru is one of my favorite Spider-Man artists ever, and a lot of it is because of the way he can depict architecture, cityscapes. You can clearly tell he lived in New York and loved living in New York.
Yeah,
Paul, I think you've
definitely.
mentioned this once. Despite the fact that there's barely any detail on that building, because it's just the top of that building, exactly what building it is.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not even American, and I knew this was the Empire State Building straight away.
It's the Needle.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Such a great cover. It has been homaged like a billion times. Like a billion times. Even once by Alex Ross recreating the same cover. I think the most recent I saw was Spider-Man and Alpha. Let's move on. I love how it's called the greatest superhero team up of all time, by the way, just because it's the first one, the first crossover team up. And then, many, many, many years later, you'd have something like JLA Avengers.
Yeah.
Right. And this is okay. So when you saw this, like, let's say you saw this, right? This is called the Battle of the Century. And I know, Paul, you want to go through this question. So I'm going to ask you first. When you saw the words, the Battle of the Century, who did you root for?
Yeah, it was Superman.
Of course.
But it's daft because, like, Superman's not the underdog, is he? Like, he's supposed, especially this particular version of Superman.
This is the most powerful version of Superman.
Yeah. But I still rooted for him.
Did I have the year wrong here? Is it 1976? It is 1976. Okay, so it is 2 years before the movie, so it wasn't 1978. Sorry about that. Gerry Conway and Ross Andru Gerry Conway had just left Amazing Spider-Man and had gone on to write Superman. I think that was why they were chosen for this, is because they were the ones who had worked on both characters at the time. LaMar, who are you rooting for in the Battle of the Century?
Obviously I was rooting for Superman. I mean, doesn't matter, especially at that time, it doesn't matter, who you put in front of him. I was rooting for Superman. That's just the way that works. But like you said, it's just this was, the most powerful iteration of Superman, because the crisis hadn't happened yet and he hadn't been depowered. That was like maybe another 10 years away. But
yeah,
but I like Spider-Man too. So I was like, okay, how is Spider-Man going to make this interesting, right? So I wanted to see that. That's another thing that made me want to read the book, because I wanted to see what Spider-Man was going to do, and how, he was going to, because it's like a lot of things have been established by that point with both these characters. So it's like, okay, Superman's not going to kill him because he doesn't do that. So, okay. So it's like, what is Spider-Man going to do to make the fight interesting? And what is Superman going to do to show restraint and not, kill him or whatever? You know what I mean? Because obviously he's not going to do that. So all of those kinds of things you know, because the inverse was just not a possibility, right? Like today, you never know. Depends on who's writing a book and what they're allowed to get away with. But in these days, that just wasn't going to happen. But yeah, but none of that prepared me for actually reading the comic. You know what I mean? Like none of it did. You know, I just was like, it's Superman and it's Spider-Man. I was aware even at that age that DC and Marvel were two different companies. So I understood the scope of it. But, you know, just, you know, it was no words after that, you know? Yeah, it was great. It was great. Like I'm thinking about it now and just reliving it all over again, man. It was something else, man.
Yeah, so I saw the words "the battle of the century," and I wasn't rooting for anyone because what went on in my mind was like, "What? That's not a fight." Superman would murder him, not literally. And then of course, you know, they do fight, and we'll get to that later. But these are again, this is my favorite DC superhero and my favorite Marvel superhero. So I think at the time there was no way for me to know how protected Superman was by DC. He could have been fighting Thor in this crossover and he would have, you know, he would have won, right? Because DC was very, very protective of Superman, right down to the point where they would redraw Kirby's Superman faces because they're just really protective of the way he looked and the way he was portrayed in every possible iteration. In contrast, Spider-Man is a character who's better if he loses or is on the losing end at least or gets his tail handed to him. So I feel like Spider-Man continually trying to beat Superman and failing is actually in character. Let's move on to so we have a splash page here, which is at last the greatest team up of all time, Superman and the Amazing Spider-Man, which is just really another way to do the cover.
Yeah.
I like how Spider-Man in both images is clinging on to things with bars instead of a solid wall. So you have your credits edited by Carmine Infantino and Stan Lee, written by Gerry Conway, drawn by Ross Andru, inked by the great Dick Giordano, lettered by Gaspar Saladino, colored by Jerry Serpe and Rick Taylor, produced by Saul Harrison with an assist from Jack Adler, consulting editing by Roy Thomas, Julie Schwartz, Marv Wolfman, and E. Nelson Bridwell. So I think it was pretty much in good hands. Prologue 1, LaMar. I'm not going to go through this page by page. We'll just talk about this particular segment here because it starts with Superman fighting Lex Luthor, the whole thing, and then catching Lex Luthor at the end. And you've said that it's that double page spread that got you to buy the comic. So what did you guys think of this particular prologue?
You know what? It's just like, because I have it in front of me, I'm looking at it now. One thing I want to say is that the letterer in this comic, he got busy. Like, just like, because lettering is an art all of its own, and it can make or break a page if you don't do it right. So with all of these like huge sound effects and things like that is aiding and abetting the action and stuff like that, it just drew me in, you know, and it's just like it's in perfect harmony with the actual layout of the pages and stuff like that. So you know, the Lex Luthor robot is, you know, it's, you know, typical for a 70s, you know, robot, you know, as you're going into the 80s and stuff like that. But, you know, it's obvious, you know, who it is and everything, because it's like, you know, during that time, you know, just with what they were doing, not just you know, because Superman was already a multimedia character, right? So
at the time, yeah,
he was already that. So, you know, if you're gonna do something like this, you kind of have to like up the stakes a little bit out the gate. So,
was Spider-Man had the cartoon already at the time, right?
Yeah. Spider-Man, his cartoons came out after those early Marvel cartoons like in the 60s. You know, the
the
Fantastic
67
Four and all that.
cartoon.
Yeah. His was right on the tail end of the 60s. So,
And this
Spider-Man.
crossover was right before the Nicholas Hammond TV show.
Right. Yeah, it was right before
yeah.
that. That hadn't happened yet. Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Because with that TV show was really popular, and I think that would have made the book even bigger if the TV show was out, by then. You know what I mean? But it's just everything. This whole thing, because it's like we were talking about in the Action Comics thing. Superman's thing is about action, but in this opening scene, like everything is about action. He's constantly reacting to things he's acting, and then he's moving. He's in constant motion the entire time, like he's never still. Like all of that stuff is it's here, and it's just they did a really really good job of establishing what Superman could do, and it just kind of it's like wow, like what's Spider-Man gonna do? It's like it's like is he gonna come and help him? Like what's gonna happen? Because you don't know. So it was fantastic, man. This whole scene is fantastic.
I will say hello to everybody watching. Thank you for joining the first Comics Cube live stream. We are talking about Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man. Monica and Samantha, we see you in the chat. Hello. Paul, your thoughts on the prologue?
I think every Superman story should open with him fighting something big, like a giant robot or a big monkey or something, So it was like perfect opener to the story. I remember it's interesting reading it as a kid. Like I read it so much as a kid, so I vividly remember how I felt. But then reading it now as an adult, because when I read it as a kid, this prologue bit, it's like Superman figures out that it needs that gravity ray from its feet, the big robot, to keep itself upright.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses that to his advantage, and I'm like, Superman, you're so clever. And then later on, he's like, I should have realized it's left a trail of destruction back, and he follows the trail of destruction back to Lex Luthor. And again, it's like, oh, he's so clever. But now you read it, like, of course you follow the trail of destruction back. Why didn't you do that straight away? But that's not a criticism, because it's very much written for this sort of like childlike wonder audience, and the narration sort of conveys that as well. It's got very sort of unique narration. This story's got like a voice to it. Like it's almost like Gerry Conway is saying, like, yeah, this is really cool, isn't it? Along with the reader, it just sucks you in and tells you the type of story it is straight away.
I thought it was weird that we were starting with a whole prologue with just Superman, because I'm like, whoever goes first, especially when you find out later on that they were trying really hard to make things more fair, right? Mm-hmm. Whoever goes first is at an unfair advantage, even though they do follow it up with like prologue number 2, which is all about Spider-Man, because it's, one is better than 2. Mm-hmm. I say insightful things on this show. And it's just the fact that it's Superman fighting Luthor right away, like already I think primed me up for it being more of a Superman dominated story. And just the fact that it's Luthor, and you know what, you see at the very end that he's got a plan up his sleeve, right? So the fact that Luthor has a plan already kind of shows that on the villain side, it's going to be a Luthor dominated story. Now, having said that, I just want to point out this entire prologue is like a really good issue of a Superman comic from 1976. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. You could take this whole thing and then just stick it into put it in between the covers of something called Action Comics number 577 or whatever, and then it would be a good comic.
Yeah.
really quickly, what do you guys think of the interlude between when Clark goes to the Daily Planet and he has to, mess with Steve Lombard?
I love that. I love Steve Lombard. It's one of my favorite aspects of 70s, early 80s Superman stories is him, Clark, getting his revenge on Steve Lombard. And it's a real highlight of like how different Superman was back then to how he is now. Because now, I think a lot of people like to paint. We've talked about this before. A lot of people like to paint Superman as this sort of Jesus figure who turns the other cheek, and he doesn't turn the other cheek. Superman, if you mess with him, he will mess with you. And he was always doing that with Steve Lombard, and it was always so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
LaMar, how much do you miss Steve Lombard?
I miss him. For here, right? Like when you look at this, like when he does the whole water pail thing over the door, right? And it backfires on him, and it falls on him, and basically, they're like, man, get that pail of water off your head. Like, are you a sportscaster or a clown? So while I'm reading, I'm like, he's both, right? He gets paid to be a sportscaster, but he's a grade A clown. You know what I mean? So, this guy's he's an idiot. So, or whatever. You know what I mean? He's not very smart. So, and he's nowhere near as smart as he thinks he is. So
yeah, I do miss. I actually prefer this version of Steve Lombard to the more modern version where he's just a big dumb jock, because I feel like the big dumb jock thing is a little too on the nose.
Yeah, it's a yeah, you're right about that. And like when you think about that would actually come later in the movies, you know what I mean? But it would be in Smallville, and not in Metropolis or whatever. But yeah, but he's kind of like one of those characters that like you could make a character to do what he does. It's like a slot that can be filled, by just about anybody. But yeah, but I was happy he was in this story though, because I just like seeing stuff happen to him. You know what I mean? Especially as a child, like I was just like I laughed at this like like crazy.
It's so basic too. The bucket on the bucket on the door.
Yeah.
All right. Great. So Lex Luthor gets caught, but ends up putting something to implement his escape from prison. And then Clark meets his Daily Planet staff to board a plane on the way to New York. And then we go into a page break, which is a pause for hero identification. And it drives me insane that there was ever a time that they felt the need to have hero identification for Superman. But every comic is somebody's first. So I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, Paul. Would you mind reading this page out loud?
Oh, yeah, go on. Let's have a look. And now a pause for hero identification. Born on the planet Krypton, young Kal-El escaped the cataclysmic destruction of his home world in an experimental rocket designed by his father. Coming to Earth, where, thanks to the rays of our yellow sun and Earth's lighter gravity, he gained the spectacular powers which have made him Superman. Stronger than any man alive on Earth, Superman was adopted by the Kents, who taught him to use his indestructibility in an everlasting fight against crime for truth, justice, and the Terran way.
Well, that's a weird choice of words at the end.
It's a weird, like, there's two things about that. Is that it's interesting how, like, every time DC decide not to use truth, justice, and American way and come up with an alternative, everyone complain. Well, not everyone, but idiots on the internet complain. They were doing it in 1976, but the fact is they're doing it a lot better now because frankly the Terran way is rubbish. Like, what is the Terran way?
it's one of those words. It doesn't mean anything, right? Because if you live on a planet and the planet has dirt, you live in a terran environment, right? But like, what about the people who live like on gas planets? Or like, we know that DC Comics has, planets that are 100% water, right? What about them? I mean, they just kind of like left to deal with whatever their own crap is. You know what I mean? Like, it's actually kind of exclusive. It sounds fine when you're in the world that we live in, but when you're talking about the world that Superman and Spider-Man live in, it's like, nah, man, you could have just cut it at Truth and Justice and just left it alone, right?
Seriously.
I didn't question it. It's like the Path of Destruction thing I was on about. When I was 10, I was like, yeah, Truth, Justice, and the Terran Way.
Yep, Terran.
Yeah. he's on Earth, right? Yeah, the Terran Way. Yeah.
Apparently, it's okay to defend Earth and just Earth.
Yeah.
I will remind all of you that this man has a Martian friend. Okay.
Right. That's the other thing.
Hey JD, what's up? I'm glad you could join us. So hey everyone, welcome back to the Comics Cube. We are talking about Superman vs. the Amazing Spider-Man from 1976 by Gerry, Conway, and Andru. We are now at prologue number 2, which is Spider-Man versus Dr. Octopus, which I will say again is on its own a very good issue of Spider-Man. Like if you just take a look at the prologue. Much like the first appearance of Superman here, where there's a double-page spread, this also has a double-page spread of the Amazing Spider-Man. And what I love about this, though, is that Superman going in to fight Luthor's giant robot, very in character for a guy who leads Action Comics. Spider-Man lounging around on a flagpole, also very in character. So that's, I think, like when I hear people talking about how lopsided these particular this crossover is because Superman like actually does a lot more. I think it's overlooked how in character Spider-Man actually is in this whole issue, because this is exactly what he would do. He would be just like, oh hey, my spider sense is tingling and I see robbers. And then here's Dr. Octopus, which, by the way, leads me to my favorite thing in this entire crossover, which is the Flying Octopus. I want to point out to everyone that is a flying vehicle with 8 tentacles called the Flying Octopus. Why does Dr. Octopus need the Flying Octopus? I don't know.
What's even better about the Flying Octopus is that later in the story he disguises it as a blimp, and it's like, what? Are you worried you're going to get pulled over?
But he says when he because he's fighting Spider-Man and stops, and then points to it with a hand gesture, like, "Hey, I'm about to take up a notch on y'all. Look what I got." And Spider-Man is like, dude, come on, man, really? Like a flying octopus, that's the best you could do,
There is one vehicle that is better than the Flying Octopus, by the way. It is called the Supermobile. It is Superman's flying car with arms that will punch you.
Yeah.
Because Superman needs this car, guys.
Yeah. Think about that. If you feel like you work a job or something and you feel like you're useless on your job, right? You're not the Supermobile, right? So there's hope. Okay.
So this particular prologue, what do you guys think?
It's interesting comparing it with the Superman prologue today with sort of cynical modern eyes, because you read the first one and you're like, Superman, how come you didn't realize that all you got to do is follow back the trail of rubble? How come you didn't realize it was Lex Luthor? That's really daft. But here, Spider-Man's doing like equally boneheaded stuff, like forgetting to restock his web shooters, on a number of occasions, and you're like, yeah, that's perfectly in character for Spider-Man to be that stupid. Like, that is definitely something he would do.
That's the thing, though. Like, I think, like, look, both of them are very good prologues, but I feel like Spider-Man screwing up really is so much in character, because there is that interlude too. So you got Clark Kent with Steve Lombard, but then you also have Peter here trying to sell photos to Jonah, and he doesn't end up selling the photos because the photos he took sucks because something went wrong with the automatic camera. And there's just something about that it's funnier because it's supposed to be funnier. You know what I mean? Like, Clark isn't conceived to be a funny character. So whenever he is in a funny situation, a lot of it is about him reacting to a funny circumstance. Like, Peter's just got bad luck all the time. And also has the funniest, most ridiculous supporting cast member ever in J. Jonah Jameson. LaMar, thoughts on the prologue too?
It's funny because it's like when you read it, right, it reads like something wrong is about to happen, right? So when he brings the film, and I know that sounds crazy for some of y'all out there because you're like, film, what is film? But he brings it to him and everything, and then he's like, hey man, look, this is great. The first the only images ever captured of the Flying Octopus, which I tend to be dubious about because Dr. Octopus has pictures of this thing. We just know he does. Right now, of course, he's not going to give him to J. Jonah Jameson, but he's so proud of this thing, he has pictures of it, I'm sure. So,
LaMar, on the sliding timeline where this now takes place 10 years ago, Dr. Octopus definitely has selfies with this thing.
Yeah, he does. He does, definitely. Yeah,
they're really good selfies too, because the tentacle just goes all the way over there. Right?
No,
has the phone over there.
Yeah, because you got the selfies now with the countdown feature, so you can pose and get straight before the picture snaps and everything. He got that. So, and J. Jonah Jameson is, for some reason, he's happy about Peter having pictures of this thing, and so he's just like, well, yeah, here, lay down, man. You'll probably get something out of the deal. I'm gonna get a Pulitzer, right? And you might get a little something, and then he comes back and the pictures are screwed up, so it's like Spider-Man's shoulder in the picture, and then he's like, oh man, and then he attacks him. That's the funny thing about it. Like,
he jumps right over the table. I love it.
Yeah, he grabs him and he's like, you did this on purpose, so he's like,
So tell me something. One, what do you think of Dr. Octopus's green costume? Because I kind of hate whenever he has a costume.
It's I'm kind of ambivalent to it, really, but the other costume he had, because this one is a little different than like his original one. The original one, it seemed to me like a costume a guy like him would have, but also I prefer the kind of chubby Dr. Octopus versus the muscle bound one that we get here, but yeah, it's kind of like what kind of costume do you give a guy like that, right? So it becomes, so it's like, do you give him like the lab coat with the stuff underneath? Like, what do you do? Yeah, I don't know, has he ever had like a great costume? Like, I don't know if he has.
The white suit that Eric Larson draws him in, I really like that.
That is,
I forgot about that.
Costume.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, it's like a white suit. Yeah. But
he's dressed up though, isn't he? He wants to look, it's not like his kicking about the house suit though, is it? Like,
Oh no. Yeah, he definitely suited and booted. So yeah, it's no question about it. But Dr. Octopus doesn't seem to me the type of person who has a sense of style, right? So, so I guess, hey, it's good enough, for him. He seems to be that kind of character. So, him not actually having a great costume is probably in line with his character.
I will say that that part where Peter rushes into the Empire State Building, pushes somebody out of the way, and the guy's like, pushy blasted New Yorker. That is something where as a kid, like I felt like it was cooler that Marvel had real cities compared to DC's fictional cities. Because I felt like it was, oh well, now I know New Yorkers are pushy. Now I know the Empire State Building's express elevator only goes up to the 80th floor, which it does. Right? So just things like that. I think it added an extra touch. But then I realized that it was just because not a lot of people were putting a lot of effort into actually, making Metropolis seem real.
Yeah. They have since, I think.
They have since, yeah. Because you get to something like Opal City, which is completely fake. And it's like the greatest city in comic books. I'm dying on this hill, guys. Hey, Paul, how about another pause for hero identification?
Oh, yeah. You know how you were saying that every comic is somebody's first?
Yeah.
This wasn't my first Spider-Man comic, but it was the first time I found out that Uncle Ben had been killed and Spider-Man had an Uncle Ben. So, yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See, now you can't go like 5 minutes without them reminding you of that.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, I was reading it 10 years old. They should mention this more. Okay. Yet another pause for hero identification. While still in high school, young Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider at a science exhibition. Instead of dying, he soon found himself possessing uncanny abilities, the proportionate strength of a spider, the knack of climbing walls, all of which made him a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. With the death of his Uncle Ben, a death Peter felt he could have prevented, Spidey turned his talents to fighting crime. He had designed a costume with one-way eye holes, a handy-dandy web shooter which carried his own web formula, and a special belt pack containing all sorts of spider goodies. Now he too battles evil as Spider-Man.
Okay, so three things here. One, this is not a death Peter felt he could have prevented. It's a death he could have prevented, Gerry.
Conway thinks he nice to him.
That's not debatable.
Yeah, they were kind to him with that one. Yeah, it's like that's kind of the point. He could have, and but chose not to.
One-way eye holes. Like I think they've since made it a one-way mirror.
Do you know what they spent a lot of time in the 60s and 70s explaining how things like the eye holes worked, and they don't do that so much now. I don't think we just kind of take it for granted a lot more.
Ignore it.
Yeah.
This might have been the first time I found out that he had a utility belt.
Yeah.
LaMar, thoughts on hero identification here?
One thing I want to say is that it goes back, like these harken back to the superhero origin or whatever, because that's really all they are, and they're all told in a minimum amount of panels, and then you have the one large one, and they're really put together very well, like the draftsmanship of it, and the art, of course, is amazing.
Andru's really underrated.
Yeah,
historically, and even back then.
Yeah, I mean, like he's somebody who does human anatomy and like buildings and stuff like that, like equally well. That's kind of rare because some people they do one or the other really well, but he does both like at a very high degree. And I really enjoy looking at his work and everything, man, because he's just an awesome artist, and he was made for Spider-Man, just like his style. But yeah, it's interesting because like what you were saying about like the one-way eye holes, like I never really thought about it until you get like Mark Bagley, for example, who when Spider-Man gets beat up, like he draws a little cracks in him and stuff like that. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, obviously it's some type of like hard plastic or glass or something like that, right? But I just never really thought about it all that much.
And
I
then
just
you'd sometimes get those artists where like, if he's squirming, then they'd keep the eye as big as it is, but then he'd be like,
yeah. hmm Yeah, which I think is a cool gag. In a comic, it's appropriate, but I don't know. I wouldn't want to see that like in a live action movie or whatever. I think that would be kind of, you know, that
it'll look
it
weird.
wouldn't. Yeah, it'd be a little weird. Because the mechanics of that, would take away from it. But no, and with Spider-Man's origin, just like any of the great origin stories for characters, they're simple, but you can expand upon them as much as you want, or you could just keep it to the bare necessity, and you still get the point across, right? Which sometimes you get into problems when you do too much. Like you look at like Hawkman stuff, for example, they kept piling stuff on, and it's like no, just keep it simple. The more simple, the better. But yeah,
He's a dude with wings.
yeah, it's like and he smashes stuff. Like I mean, it's like you don't need to get into all the other stuff. Do that in the comic, but you don't need to pile things on like it's crazy. But yeah, these are great. And I was familiar with these from just the other comics that I had read with the 6-panel grid or whatever, or the 5-panel grid in this case. But yeah, I love these. I just think the pause for hero identification, like word bubble, I just think that's hilarious though, right? Like especially in context, it's like it's Superman and Spider-Man, we get it.
Yeah,
But
you can tell they're not actually taking it that seriously,
yeah, absolutely.
Like
Yeah,
they're having fun. It's like it's like they've got these couple of toys and then
yeah, right.
they can
And
have fun with it. Yeah.
that's exactly what should happen with stuff like this. The creators should enjoy themselves, you know. Because especially when it's like, okay, we don't know when we're gonna get to do this again, right? So, it's something, the silliness in comics I always think should be embraced. When people try to run from it, the work suffers, I think. That's just my opinion. But yeah, just looking back on it now, like, it's ridiculous in the best way possible.
Prologue number 3 takes place in Deming, New Mexico, and has Lex Luthor meeting Dr. Octopus, where Dr. Octopus's arms are deactivated. Lex Luthor then enacts this ridiculously elaborate escape plan where he has hidden sonic disruptors in a fake layer of flesh on his arm. I can't even. You two talk about this. I can't even.
I love how like the guards have searched Lex Luthor from top to bottom, and we know you haven't got anything on you, but they've left that bloody watch on his wrist that he uses to activate his device, and it's got 4 buttons on it. It's clearly a really evil looking watch.
It's clearly not a real watch. See, the question is he really a mad genius, or the people in this universe just really dumb?
Yeah.
Okay. And something that's funny about this whole exchange is that Lex Luthor is skinning and grinning the entire time. Like he's even like laying in the bed or whatever, like before he pulls the fake skin back. he's grinning the entire time. Like you would think at some point, okay, this is something that should tip somebody off. Like if this guy is like, he just seems really pleased to go to jail, right? So, you would think, okay, man, this guy's plotting something, right? Maybe we should check him and make sure he don't have no fake skin on him, right? But it's ridiculous, man. It really, really is. And I'm here for the whole thing.
The power cell that he used to broadcast with his little watch reactivates Dr. Octopus's tentacles, and then they escape, with Lex Luthor riding on Dr. Octopus's back. So again, once again, like I was saying, this does seem a little DC DC skewed, because Lex is the one who breaks them out of jail.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of limited though, because like Dr. Octopus is a clever guy, but relative to Lex Luthor, he's never going to be able to show what he can do himself, is he? Like, so, but then how can you not use Lex Luthor when you're doing the first ever Superman versus Spider-Man? So I guess given their limitations that are inherent in such a team up, I think they do well with it.
Well, here's the question, guys. This is 4 years after the death of the Green Goblin. If it had happened sooner, would it have been, in fact, the Green Goblin, do you think?
Yeah. I don't know. Is he too similar to Luthor?
Right.
It's interesting how later on, like, spoilers for the end, but Luthor's the nutcase who wants to destroy the world, and Dr. Octopus is the one who's like, hang on, I want to spend my ill-gotten gains somewhere. Please don't destroy the Earth. But it would have been, if it would be Norman Osborn, he would have been the one who wanted to destroy the Earth.
Yeah.
And Luthor would have been the voice of reason.
Well, also, so here's something to think about when it comes to that particular question. When exactly does Norman Osborn become Spider-Man's number one villain? Isn't it when he kills Gwen? So if that's the case, if it had happened before that, wouldn't this still have been Dr. Octopus?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think it probably would have ended up being him anyway, I think. You know what I mean? But I don't think it would have come down to like like popularity necessarily, because that's kind of what you'd be like, who's the most popular villain, and you put him. I think that may have been a little different. I think because of what you said, with Green Goblin. But it's interesting to think about, though.
Okay, so hey Paul, how about villain identification?
Okay.
I just want to say we're 52 minutes in and we're just about to get to chapter 1.
And leave us not forget our villainous villains, such as Otto Octavius, once a physicist working to unlock the ultimate secrets of the atom. Dr. Octavius became a victim of his experiments when a model atomic pile exploded, grafting Otto's work arms to his body and providing him with telepathic control over his new metallic limbs. Thus was born that dread menace, Dr. Octopus. Young Lex Luthor, on the other hand, was a criminal since the days of his adolescence. Like Octavius, he too was the victim of an experiment gone wrong. This time, indirectly, because of his childhood friend, Superboy. As a result of the disaster, Luthor lost all his hair permanently. And the shock of this, coupled with the explosion itself and the loss of a vital experiment to create life, caused Luthor to hate his former pal. Over the years, he's invented many devices to defeat the Man of Steel and has proven himself Superman's toughest and most elusive enemy.
So did you guys learn anything here? Did you learn anything from this villain identification for the first time when you first read this? Because this is definitely when I first found out about the whole hair loss thing.
Same, yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah, because that was kind of a big thing. Like, it was in I think it was in the cartoons. I think they changed it a little bit, but
what, the Ruby Spears cartoon?
No. There was something before that, and they mentioned it. I can't remember what it was. But it was something before that one that they had mentioned it in. But and it was in like children's books. Like, 'cause, they had DC had a lot of like material like for like small children, like for like counting and just stuff like that. And it was in a lot of that stuff. And they would actually draw it out, with the shed blowing up and then Superman coming in with his super breath and Lex Luthor's hair like blowing off and all this other kind of stuff. So it was like a thing. But and that's like going into the I guess this is in like the back end of the 70s, and then but when you go into the 80s it was still around, I think, until the whole Crisis thing happened.
Yeah.
And then they went in another direction with the tone and everything. But yeah, it was around for a minute.
Well, I'm just gonna say, when I first read this, I was like, no, it can't be that dumb. And then when I finally read the Silver Age story where he did lose his hair and blamed Superboy on it, the exact panel where he's like, because of you, I've lost my hair. I will hate you forever. I was like, oh my God, it's dumber.
I did actually find out about it before this story. I remember now because I think you've read this story as well, LaMar. It's an issue where Luthor makes Superman slightly younger, and for some reason this makes Superman really brash and headstrong. And the cover of the issue is Superman throwing some guy from a plane. It's a really cool cover.
Mm-hmm.
And in that story, some like henchmen mention that, oh yeah, Superman caused Luthor to lose his hair, so he's after Superman's scalp, and that's where I learned it. It's a really good story.
We are 56 minutes into the stream, and we are talking about Superman and the Amazing Spider-Man, and we are now getting to Chapter 1, A Duel of Titans. However, I have just counted, and it looks like those 3 prologues are half the book, so I don't feel too bad about it.
Yeah, it's like you're talking like 40 pages in now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I believe, so I don't know if this is true, but because I didn't actually do the counting, but I do believe that Superman and Spider-Man have the same number of panels in this entire book. Now the sizes of those panels, though, may be different, but they are meant to have equal time. So this particular chapter opens in a double-page spread of, coincidentally, the Daily Bugle staff coming up one escalator and the Daily Planet staff coming up the other escalator, and Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson. What is Mary Jane doing here? I don't know. But Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson just walking with each other ahead of everyone else. So this is the first time we actually see them in the same panel. What did you guys think of this particular sequence? Because this is the part where it does get Peter Parker focused.
It's really clever because it's setting up why Spider-Man would want to fight Superman. You can see why Peter's getting to the end of his tether. It makes slightly less sense why Superman would be so eager to fight Spider-Man. But you completely understand why Spider-Man wants to fight Superman, because Peter's just, he's had a guts full of it all.
This whole sequence where Jonah's yelling at Peter is awesome. You're not hardworking, not diligent, and there are times when I'm not even sure you're a photographer. What a dick. Okay. LaMar, that's followed up by Superman and Lois taking a look at ComLab 1, the world's first orbiting communications laboratory. And yeah, I feel like they're trying to balance out the whole thing with Jonah with Morgan Edge. Do you think it works?
It does. And the reason why it does is because it plays on that whole trope of Superman's. It's centered around, in a lot of ways, around Superman's identity and how the glasses are like the thing that keeps everybody from knowing who he is. But it comes off really smooth Because Lois is like, man, you just gonna let this man steal your story like this or whatever? And so, he's got his back to her, right? Because he needs to put his glasses back on. And
Yeah.
he's hamming it up with the smoke, you know what I mean? With him blowing the smoke in his face. And so he's like, yeah, matter of fact, that's exactly what I'm gonna do, right? So I think using that trope here, um, it works, right? And because if you it's like it's natural because that's something that Morgan Edge would do, and that's something that Clark would do, right?
This particular iteration of Clark, yeah.
Yeah, this one would definitely do it. And this particular Clark, that it wouldn't last too much longer, before things would get changed. But so you're actually seeing like the last little bit of that type of the type of milk toast Clark that just lets he plays him as somebody who's you'll let him he'll let you walk all over him or whatever, and but so it's interesting just looking back on it, and seeing how they played it here.
Lois Lane goes up to ComLab 1, falls off the scaffolding, is saved by Peter Parker. This is the first actual interaction between a DC character and a Marvel character.
Yeah.
And Mary Jane gets a little jealous, and Lois is just straight up kills it right there. He's too young for me. Lois Lane and Mary Jane Watson here. Paul, thoughts on this particular scene?
Lois is really good throughout this whole thing because in the prologue, we're seeing like quintessential Clark and Lois, aren't we? Like, Clark being spineless and Lois giving him grief about it. Like, that's Action Comics #1 stuff, that is. Like, and we see it through here as well into this part of the story. It's weird how, like, at this point, like, Mary Jane, was she actually his, like, destined to be forever girlfriend here at this point, like, that she became?
No.
It's interesting how she was the closest he had at this point, like,
Well, at this point, because Conway had left the Amazing Spider-Man book, so Len Wein was writing it at this point. Ross Andru was drawing it. If Len Wein was writing it, yeah, because Conway's last scene was at the end of the Clone Saga when Peter and Mary Jane make up and become an official couple. So at this point, they are officially dating. Marv Wolfman would get on the book and then break them up immediately.
Yeah, it does make you wonder if, like, if this crossover had come a little later, if it'd be Lois Lane and Deb Whitman or something, like, or Felicia
I'm
Hart.
glad it's Mary Jane.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because if anyone, like, I'm not going to buy Felicia Hardy getting captured here.
No.
And anyone else would suck. So you really only have two options. It's Mary Jane or Gwen. That's it. So given the choices, the many choices we could have for Spider-Man's co-star here, I'm glad we got Mary Jane.
Yeah. Yeah, she's definitely the best fit for something like this.
Absolutely, yeah.
The best foil for Lois, too.
Yeah.
But do you think it was luck that we got Mary Jane? It wasn't necessarily because this is his best girlfriend. It was just because this happens to be who he's dating at the moment.
Well, before I don't really want to dwell on you calling her his best girlfriend. But
I'm sorry.
Well, we were talking earlier about what if it happened before Gwen died. If it hadn't happened before Gwen died, it would have definitely been Gwen.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So here's the question. If it had happened during Wolfman's run where he breaks them up immediately and then it was Betty, because he was trying to get him and Betty back together, would it have been Betty? I don't know. And I'm glad it wasn't.
Yes.
Maybe we lucked out. I don't know.
Yeah. I think maybe we might have. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go. But she is the best foil for Lois here.
Absolutely. She's perfect. Yeah. And I imagine Gerry Conway probably knew that. It was probably a deliberate decision on his part, like, to use Mary Jane.
Mary Jane talking to Lois and being all like, "You're not the liberated type, eh, Miss Lane?" It's like, wow. Some men dig their women feminine. Wow. I'm really sad this is the only scene they get together.
But you
He
see him
could've-
arguing while being tied to that big pole later on. Or something.
Yes, we do. Okay. A Superman replica, clearly a Superman replica, comes in and heat visions them out of existence, which really just means they get teleported. And Peter talks to Clark, and Peter's like, "Where are the phone booths?" And Clark is like, "Over there." Peter runs to the phone booths and realized that they're no longer booths, they're just stalls. Does this feel like a familiar joke? Could it have happened in a movie where the lead actor is would have been celebrating his birthday today? So for everybody watching, that is actually a joke in the first Superman movie 2 years after this Superman vs. the Amazing Spider-Man in 1978. Superman looks at the phone booth and is like, "Well, I can't change there." Right before he does his first transformation into Superman. Okay, so Peter runs up the ceiling, changes into Spider-Man. His spider sense rings like a chow bell, and then jumps off the roof. And then we get a chapter 2, When Heroes Clash. This beautiful double-page spread. Give me your thoughts. What happened? What was going on in your minds when you saw this particular spread?
I mean, when I read it, obviously that's the main event, isn't it? That's what you've come for, like, you know. Reading it today, it's really interesting. You know, if this was written today, you'd have like some kind of like first person narration from Spider-Man going, "Superman comes and he instantly makes me feel the most important person in the world. I don't believe how humble he is, nice." But this was 70s Superman. So he was like, you know, the guy who walks into the room was like, "Yeah, all right, I got this out the way," you know. It's like, I'm in charge. You know, that 70s Superman. So it's interesting seeing the contrast between, and I think you know, this is pre-Christopher Reeve Superman, isn't it? So Christopher Reeve is responsible for much of that change into what we know now as Superman. But so yeah, it wouldn't work the same way now. The reason for them fighting would be even more contrived than it is here.
The reason for the fighting is ridiculous here. Superman replica, Superman shows up and heat visions these two girls out of existence, and then Superman, the real Superman, shows up and blames Spider-Man.
And look, and the funny part about that, right, is that he says he blames it on Spider-Man's background, right? So it's obvious that he buys into the whole thing of Spider-Man just being a menace to society that J. Jonah Jameson has been putting out there for years, right? So obviously he's been reading the papers and he just came to his own conclusion about Spider-Man, right? So it's like, yeah, I knew he was in on it the whole time, you know?
Superman believing everything you read.
Believing everything you read, you know?
All right, so let's talk about this fight, guys. So, well, before we talk about this fight, how about we talk about this panel where Lex Luthor is taking off his Superman mask while he's wearing a Superman costume, indicating that he was the fake Superman.
Like, who else was it going to be, right?
How did they fake him flying?
Yo,
but also, what is Dr. Octopus even doing at this point? Like, yeah.
No, like, and then Lex blasts Spider-Man with a red sun radiation device to make him stronger. And all Dr. Octopus is doing is explaining what Lex is doing. So he's really just explaining things for the reader.
Oh, thanks, Otto.
This is very nice of you, Otto.
Yeah, and the funny thing about it is that they never really explain how red sun radiation makes Spider-Man stronger, but they don't really need to, so it's not a problem. I just think it's funny, you know. They were like, "Yeah, you got anything to make this guy stronger? Yeah, I'm gonna use this red sun gun." You know,
That I have never used on myself, by the way. So here's Spider-Man. He punches Superman. That is one hell of a shot, by the way. It's one of my favorite shots in the book where he punches Superman. And then he follows it up by kicking him through a building. And then it's just Spider-Man beating the crap out of Superman for a while. And then Superman punches him once.
How cool is it though when he kicks Superman through that wall and you see, I never noticed it on my first read, but the web snaps.
Yeah.
It's so cool because you really get a sense of like, yeah, he's like so much stronger than he usually is. Like, yeah, I love that.
Because his web never snaps.
Yeah.
You're not half so tough as you think you are, he says. It's nice that he has proper grammar. He punches him off a building, everything, and then and then Superman throws a punch and pulls the punch back just in time. But though the punch is stopped, the wind blast is not. And the second later, the shockwave strikes with the force of a compact hurricane. So he never actually hits him. But the way it's drawn, by the way, makes me feel like he was gonna hit him, and then somebody told Conway to make it so that he didn't hit him.
Yeah.
Right. And there you go. Spider-Man goes flying all throughout, and then finally the red sun radiation wears off, and he's just punching Superman to absolutely no effect. Thoughts on this? Thoughts on how this matchup went about, guys?
Well, it went about like it should have. I mean, just the way that they did it, with everything leading up to it. And the panel where he throws the punch and pulls it is amazing, first of all. And then, he goes flying and everything, and he rebounds, because once again, this is one thing that Superman and Spider-Man have in common. They're in constant motion all the time, right? So the way that they use these elements in this is cool. But then when Superman stops moving, that's when the fight gets really, really dire, right? Because he's just like, okay, man, I'm gonna stand here, and you can just continue to punch me if you want, but here I'm just gonna stand here, and of course he puts his hands on his hips, and pushes his chest out, and it's great. It's great. The whole thing is great, and it's funny because he's like, "Hey, how'd you get so hard so suddenly? Like, what's that about?" So he still doesn't know he's been hit with the ray, right? It's like well, he knows, but it's like it's wearing off, obviously, right? But yeah, just the way that they made the panel smaller for that exchange, I think was a really cool way to convey what was happening because they were so close to one another. And when you have Superman where he's not moving, and then Spider-Man still just wah, 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 and to draw it in tight like that, that really got across what was happening better than Superman just like thumping him or something and him going flying, right? That wouldn't have been as interesting as this,
Paul?
It's interesting what LaMar described there, where Superman means business, where he just stands there and he's had enough now, and he just lets Spider-Man wear himself out. That's so cool. They did it again in the second Superman Spider-Man crossover with the Hulk. Mm-hmm. Like the Hulk slaps him around for a bit, and then Superman has enough, and then just stands there and he's ready for it, and Hulk just wears himself out, pounding Superman. So it's interesting that they did it again in the next crossover because it's so cool.
Superman's main move is standing still.
Yeah.
By the way, how'd you get so hard so suddenly is totally not a panel a lot of people take out of context. Okay. Finally, the two of them shake hands, and after, quote, one large lump of exposition later, which I think is pretty cool, that they're well aware of the weaknesses of this particular genre, right? Like, yeah, we know there's going to be a lot of exposition. Let's just do this. And then so finally they shake hands. The next scene, chapter 3, the call of battle, we have Superman and Spider-Man going into the old Penn Central Railroad courtyard because they followed the energy residue of coming back from where they were just where they were just from. See, this is another one of those things. Clearly, Superman is doing all the work in this particular spread, but whatever Spider-Man is doing is in character. Like, so this is one of those things. It makes me want to read more of both, because while Superman is dominating the action, you know, Spider-Man is riding on web skis. That's cool. I want to hang out with him.
It is cool. And you know, the funny thing about it is that when you, once again, these opening panels where they have like the top of the page is just one panel, are like one right after the other. They're all just like really beautiful to look at. Like the draftsmanship and just everything. Like, you know, Superman, you know, while he's doing what he's doing, he looks really, really majestic. And then you have Spider-Man over in the corner, like you said, on the skis, right? So it's like this coming together of these two worlds, and it shouldn't work, but it does, right?
It's the same thing, right, Paul, with how they get into the headquarters. So you've got this entire sequence of Spider-Man sneaking in and avoiding all of these traps and avoiding being electrocuted and avoiding these lasers, and then finally going through the door where he sees Luthor and Octopus. And meanwhile, Superman punches his way through and comes in through the wall on the other end.
It's like, why did Superman let Spider-Man go through all that?
And it's funny because before he does it, he's just sitting outside leaning up against the wall with his arms folded.
Yeah, skip to the end.
He's like, I've waited long enough. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is 10 panels. Like, you know, this is what, 30 seconds for Spider-Man. And speaking of that, on the villain end, Lex is sitting down while Octopus doesn't even get a chair.
With his legs crossed. Like, it's funny, man. It's funny. This is wild.
And Superman is like, just tell me where Lois is. And Spider-Man's like, yeah, the kid with her.
Who I don't know.
Who I don't know. Here's a question I have for you guys. Why did they keep Mary Jane? Do either of them know who Mary Jane is?
Do they say, like, oh, we've accidentally got this other girl too, or do they just not mention it?
He's just like, oh yeah, the girls haven't been harmed. Do they say that?
I think they just don't mention it, do they? They're just like, yeah, we've got two.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's their way of addressing how, you know, Lois gets herself into situations in a certain way. Mary Jane does the same thing in a certain way, but, you know, they're together. And I guess they're like, hey, if Superman and Spider-Man are going to rescue somebody, they might as well just rescue both of them, you know? So what do? Let's just save a whole bunch of time. And instead of making this like a 100-page book, we just gonna have them both kidnapped at the same time, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So these two villains end up being holograms, and they want to trace it back to where they came from. And there is a machine that self-destructs the moment Spider-Man touches it. So Superman has to fix it. Look, all I'm saying is, as much as I love these two characters, this crossover is very lopsided.
I mean, Spider-Man's a liability, isn't he?
Spider-Man's just in the way at this point.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Superman would have wrapped this up probably a few pages ago. You know, but it's
For
funny,
one,
though.
for one thing, he wouldn't have had to fight Spider-Man if Spider-Man stayed out of the way. That's one.
Yeah, you know. And then the funny thing about it is like, and I think that's kind of the part. You know, Spider-Man's always, the number one reason why people love him is because they're like, hey, he's a lot like me, right? So your average person would have been in the way trying to solve something like this with Superman. So yeah, he's kind of he's the star, but he's the point of view character too. Like it's interesting the way they play both of those. Like, but like I said, it's Spider-Man, right? So if there's anybody you're going to do that with, he's the one.
And it takes us to Mount Kilimanjaro, because why again? Like, it just so happens that this is where they were, right?
Those are the coordinates in the computer.
Oh yeah, where they have their base. This particular scene seems like something out of a 90s fantasy thing, where Superman shows up and he's like, my friend and I have come from the sky seeking two evil men. One is a man of many arms. And meanwhile, this other guy's just like, yeah, you're Superman, aren't you? I read about you when I was studying in London. I feel like that's a normal scene from like the 90s, right? Like, in something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, you'd see a vampire that'd be like, oh, arcane stuff, and the guy's like, what? Shut up.
Oh, and also these people are probably when they get to Kilimanjaro and they encounter the people with the shields and the spears, these are probably intended to be the hottest of people, I would guess. But like you said, it's an interesting dynamic. Because the guy he just looks at it, he's like, hey, you're Superman, aren't you? I've seen pictures of you, right? Yeah, so I know who you are. Yeah, But,
so when Superman says they're the warriors of Maasai, a nomadic tribe familiar to this region, is that like
Maasai.
legit?
Right. I meant to say the Maasai. I'm sorry. I didn't mean the Hadza. I meant the Maasai, which you guys would know them because they're super tall. So everybody knows them for being tall, and they wear the elaborate neck pieces. Yeah.
And then, they want a sample of superpowers as a trade, and here Superman is juggling these guys. What is Spider-Man doing? I don't.
It's also interesting how Superman immediately interprets, "Oh, we want a sample of your powers" in that way. It's like he juggles those guys. What if, like, they said, "Well, we're actually gonna ask you to like collect our crops for us or build us something," but okay, you've juggled some dudes. Okay,
Like, it's really hot here. We could use some rain.
yeah.
Maybe take us flying. Like, very simply, pick us up and take us flying.
I've juggled some dudes. That's all I'm doing today.
There's also the other thing, which is like, why would you assume we meant you?
Right.
There's a dude here with spider powers.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to stick to a wall.
Yeah.
All right, so they go into a particular area north of Kilimanjaro where a vanished tribesman shows up, all mad and angry, and he clearly has been hit by the red sun ray for some reason. They manage the red sun ray, by the way, makes it so that his sword is able to cut through Superman's hair. However, the way they beat him is another elaborately convoluted method where Superman heat visions Spider-Man's webbing. And then that somehow makes the webbing, it gives it the consistency of steel. I'm sure they put a lot of thought into this.
I love poor Spider-Man saying, "We make a great team, Superman." Like sort of Ralph Wiggum voice. I'm helping.
I like that Spider-Man is like, "Oh, hey, your eyeball raise."
Which is funny because at this point, Superman just could have been like, "Okay, Spider-Man, look, you got any more of this stuff you make these webs with? Give them to me, and I'm going to finish this up." You know what
I mean? I will point out, like, webbing isn't even one of his superpowers.
Right.
So there you go, Spider-Man. Good for you. No, it's just ridiculous. He's like, yeah, okay. There's no way you could have beaten him on your own. I am wrapping him with my webbing. Good stuff. Chapter 4, the Doomsday Decision. Where they find out that Lex has a satellite orbiting the Earth. It is the satellite headquarters of the Injustice Gang. And this is where Ock and Lex have kept Lois and Mary Jane. I don't really have any thoughts about this. What do you guys think of this particular interlude here?
It's weird how, like, Conway decided to use that sort of bit of continuity there. Like, oh, it's the Injustice Gang headquarters, because it would be just as plausible that Lex Luthor happened to have a base of his own orbiting the Earth, So, I wonder
just out of nowhere, right? Just out of nowhere.
I mean, it's fine. It doesn't affect anything, but I wonder why he chose to do that. Like,
I have no idea. LaMar, do you prefer it this way, or would you rather have had Lex have his own satellite?
I don't know. Like I kind of feel like, it doesn't matter all that much to me.
No.
Right? Because at this point in the book, I'm just like, I just want to see what they're going to do next, right? So I'm invested in the story. So whatever they put here, I'm going to accept it, right? Because I'm just totally invested in the story. So, because like you said, it's a story you just pull all the stops out for, right? So it's like, hey, if Lex Luthor and Dr. Octopus have a satellite in space and hey, I'm cool with it. It don't bother me a bit. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, but it's funny though, because like there's the reference here to the Injustice Gang or whatever, or but it's funny. Just like there's just like it gives you an opportunity to throw things like that in there, because obviously if their worlds are like together, you would have to establish that all of these other characters exist and that these characters were doing other things, because they're top shelf villains, so you would have to make reference to that kind of stuff some kind of way. And I guess something like this makes it a really, really good reason to do that. But then also it's kind of like a callback to it, because they always have this base somewhere that's in a swamp somewhere or up in the air somewhere or something like that. So I guess it's just kind of like a sight gag. You know what I mean?
I will point out that apparently one of the criticisms of this particular crossover, and a lot of the crossovers that came after, is that people didn't know how Superman and Spider-Man would be on the same world. These people don't know how to have fun, because it shouldn't matter. However, to get around that, the official Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover index in March 1986 and the official Crisis on Infinite Earths index in July of 1986 would formally call this reality Crossover Earth, and Marvel would assign the reality the name Earth 7642. This all is just one big giant olive branch to those people. Let it go and have your fun. Okay. Superman met Spider-Man and it's fun. It doesn't have to be explained how.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, how else are you going to do it, right? Like, do you want to literally see the two planets like smashing into one another or something like that before you buy it? I mean,
that is 100% not a Spider-Man story I want to read.
Right? Yeah.
It works for JLA Avengers, but not for Superman.
Yeah, not for Spider-Man. It's like, listen, everybody knows who Superman is. Everybody knows who Spider-Man is, right? I mean, that's it. What do you want?
We got a little interlude between J. Jonah Jameson and Morgan Edge. I think this just kind of shows that J. Jonah Jameson is untouchable. He's clearly the better character in the scene. So, like, as much as I want to say, like, yeah, this is the weirdest thing. I do think it is a lopsided crossover in terms of DC Marvel stuff. I do think it is DC dominated in terms of like the way the plot moves and who's looking good and everything. But in terms of character work, I think the Marvel characters are owning it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think there's a question about that.
It's like Spider-Man may not be in the same league as Superman, but I think I want to hang out with him. Mary Jane's a little bit more edgy than Lois Lane, but like nothing touches J. Jonah Jameson. So there you go. Okay. We have Lex has activated his plan where one of the communication lasers, where he takes over one of the communication lasers, which is ComLab, which we saw earlier. Superman and the Amazing Spider-Man then fly to the satellite. Spider-Man is in an Injustice Gang ship. And then Superman gets hit by a laser from the satellite, from ComLab. And Spider-Man thinks, Soups is in trouble. I'd better. And then he gets hit because what was he going to do? And then they wake up and Lex and Octavius are there.
And Lex Luthor has not stopped grinning the entire time. Like every scene he's in, he's grinning. And he's doing it here too.
What a dick.
Hey, he enjoys his work. I mean, what do you want,
He's here talking about how he's going to destroy the world through controlling the weather. And then Superman and Spider-Man jump on them. In true crossover fashion, Spider-Man attacks Luthor and Superman attacks Dr. Octopus. And then without gravity, the web shooters won't fire straight. And yet, somehow, they're able to jump on them. I don't know how these things work. I'm not a scientist, though, so maybe I don't know how these things work, guys.
Well, the web should work, shouldn't they? Because, like, if you push something when there's no gravity, it'll keep moving because there's nothing pulling it down until it hits a wall or something. So if Spider-Man shoots his web out, presumably that would just fly normally, maybe even a bit faster because there's nothing pulling it down, until it hit Doc Ock or wherever he was aiming at. So
we just go in a straight line.
Yeah.
See, so for everybody's reference, Paul works at a planetarium, so he knows what he's talking about. Okay. So Superman figures out how to fight them, and I'm just going to read this out loud. There's a form of Oriental fighting. Superman. In which you don't resist your opponent. Instead, you allow him to make his move first, and then you use that move against him. And then he lets Dr. Octopus attack him, and then he pulls two tentacles off of Ock. Way to Supermansplain there, Superman.
But he's not really using that tactic he just described, is he? He's just ripping Doc's arms off. Like,
Yep.
That's not like a special fighting technique, you know.
That's why it's Supermansplaining, because he's super explaining something and he's wrong.
Yeah. There's a special fighting technique where I just do this.
Where I really just use my super strength.
Yeah.
By the way, if you really think about it, it is ridiculous that these two people with ridiculous strength, obviously one with way more than the other, but still both of them with super strength, are fighting these two perfectly normal human beings.
Something I want to address as well. When did Dr. Octopus become Mr. Magoo? Is this something that's popped up in Spider-Man comics that he can't see without his glasses? Or is this like just something?
I love how you're like Mr. Magoo and I'm like Velma Dinkley.
Yeah, of course.
Superman vs. Amazing Spider-Man, everyone. JD says the unintentional comedy of this comic is off the charts.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. You know what I mean?
I make fun of it, but it's awesome.
It's awesome. Yeah. And again, as a 10-year-old, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what would happen. That makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. Like, I'm not picking this apart like on purpose. The reason I'm picking this apart is because I'm saying them out loud. Do you know how many comics sound ridiculous the moment you say them out loud?
As they
almost all of them.
Yeah.
Not just comics, like superhero movies. Like, they're ridiculous when you say them out loud. Try to describe Infinity War out loud. It's going to sound really dumb.
Yeah.
So yes, he loses his glasses. And of course, here's Supermansplaining again. Of course, thanks to equal and opposite reactions, it does backfire now and then. Okay. Despite the loss of gravity, Luthor is able to get Dr. Octopus's glasses because somehow he's made this his priority during this fight. Getting Octopus's glasses back. He gives them back to him, and Ock is like, oh no, they're broken. Let me tell you something, people. When your glasses break, you can still see. It doesn't really change anything. Maybe you'll see a little dot where the crack actually is, but that's it. So Dr. Octopus going, oh no, they're broken. You know what that says to me? It says to me, now I have to pay to replace them.
Yep.
That's the real hassle. Any more thoughts, guys, before we move on to Superman saving the Earth? And very specifically, Superman saving the Earth.
Spider-Man helps.
Spider-Man helps. Sure, why not? No more thoughts? All right, let's move on to Superman saving the Earth. So there's a tsunami heading towards the East Coast. I love how there's a footnote for tsunami defining what it is. It's a super tidal wave.
That's how I learned what it was.
That's how you learn how it was. Now, of course, it is a word in the regular lexicon because it's just a regular word now.
Yeah.
Turns out English borrows words from other languages. Can you hold the fort alone? Does Warner Brothers make movies? And then this is just unnecessary. Luthor tries to hit a button so that the airlock chamber closes, and then Superman just busts right through it. Why does Luthor even try to stop him? Well, he doesn't know him well enough at this point? And then Superman flies towards the Earth, and Spider-Man is captured. Dr. Octopus. Look, I don't know what to tell you guys. This is how it is. I don't know. So, who's the more competent superhero here, guys? What do you think?
But it's perfectly. It's like you said earlier on. It's perfectly in character, though, isn't it? Like it's like relative to Superman, in terms of competence, Spider-Man is a bit rubbish. Like, you know, like that's canon, isn't it? Like, you know.
He's not as good at his job.
Yeah.
As Superman is, okay? And that's okay. I love this comic so much, and of course, Superman ends up flying to the Earth to stop that particular tsunami. He gets a big giant spread out of it. Meanwhile, Spider-Man has to convince Dr. Octopus to turn on Lex Luthor, because Lex Luthor actually wants to destroy the world, and Dr. Octopus just wants to save. Just wants it to be saved because he wants something to rule. What do you guys think of this particular thing where Lex is just this insane?
Yeah, you don't really see him like this. It's like I said earlier on. It's like if he had teamed up with Norman Osborn, it would easily have been Norman Osborn who would have been that crazy.
Mhm.
But yeah, they kind of up Luther's level of madness, like, because if anything, like, he was kind of like slightly less evil at this point, wasn't he, in the comics? Because now and again, Silver Age and Bronze Age Luther would act good, you know, if it was like Einstein's birthday or something, and he really liked Einstein, so he'd be, you know, it's little things
That
like
is
that.
an actual real story, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul's not making that up. That is an
Yeah.
actual real story. Lex Luthor does a good deed because it's Einstein's birthday.
Yeah. And you wouldn't get that now. So if anything, he was like less likely to destroy the world at this point in time.
Yeah. It's also important to note that Lex Luthor missile drop kicks Dr. Octopus.
There is no gravity, by the way, LaMar.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I mean, if I was in zero gravity, I'd be missile drop kicking everybody. I mean, I'm just saying, I get it, you know. But I just wanted to bring it up before we move on, and also the way that Ross Andru draws this tsunami, like, you know, water.
Wait, there's the missile dropkick, everyone. There it is.
Yeah, there it is, right there, right. You know, water is really, really hard to draw. It seems like it wouldn't be, but it is. And when you're talking about moving water, it's really, really difficult to have it look like it's water, number one, but it's not solid, and then to have it look like it's moving, right? And it's just a testament to the skill of Ross Andru that, you know, he was able to do it. Yeah, like the art in this book just doesn't let up, you know, not for a moment, you know.
I will say that supposedly Neil Adams went over some of these Superman drawings and tightened it up.
You can tell.
And you can tell right there.
Yeah.
Right there. Yeah, that is not a Ross Andru face.
No, it's not.
And then John Romita Sr. apparently went over some of the Peter Parker drawings and cleaned it up. You can tell, that too.
Yeah. Yeah, you can tell it.
So after the tsunami, after that big double page spread of the tsunami, we have 6 panels of Superman stopping the tsunami right in the middle of the page. Spider-Man knocks out Lex Luthor. Isn't that great?
It's fantastic. You know.
Sorry, I've just caught a bit of dialogue on the next page. Just Spider-Man going like, coming to New York just to grab Lois Lane as bait as a trap to net you. Guess it was just luck he grabbed my girl too. Yeah, yeah, really lucky Spider-Man. Don't know what Superman would have done without it.
Oh, he lays it on thick. Because in the next panel, he refers to himself as a living legend.
Yeah.
It isn't every day two living legends go around making history. What did you do, Peter? Also, by the way, at this point, Mary Jane does not know Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that the parallel lives retcon hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
So at this point in history, Mary Jane does not know Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And in earshot, Spider-Man refers to her as my girl.
Yeah.
What? But look, she's too busy arguing with Lois, isn't she?
Okay, I want you guys to take a look at Lois and Mary Jane's body language in that last panel there. Did they just ditch the girls?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
What? Okay, here's another thing. Where are they taking them? Wouldn't it be to the same place? Why are they going in opposite directions?
Oh yeah.
And also that Superman pose, that's totally a Garcia Lopez pose. Because I've seen it. I've seen it a million times. Yeah, definitely.
I love this comic so much. I don't even know what Spider-Man is swinging from horizontally. Okay. There's the epilogue, the ever-loving epilogue, where the two of them meet as Clark Kent and Peter Parker for the first time. Right? They have not met before this as Clark and Peter. And although Lois has met Peter, she doesn't make mention of it at all. In fact, Lois and Mary Jane never ever again get another line of dialogue after they get captured. And then they end up, back at status quo because they're able to cover the team up between Superman and Spider-Man. And the final shot is the two couples walking away. And we have this nice little pinup of Superman and Spider-Man right next to each other. I have one nitpick about that particular pinup. Actually, the way that they're depicted throughout. I just feel like Superman should be significantly taller.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree.
Not like a little bit taller, significantly taller.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, was that like a mandate or something?
Maybe. Because I feel like, without consulting the official handbook of the Marvel Universe or anything, I feel like Spider-Man should be like 5'9",
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then Superman's probably like, what, 6'5" or something? 6'6", 6'5".
Yeah.
So that is not that height difference. But other than that, overall thoughts on Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man. I know we kind of roasted it here, but it's all in love.
Well, it's like the only story. It's the best possible version of. Like, I can't imagine it going any better than that, And that's not like damning it with faint praise. It is brilliant. It is great, and
and we know that for a fact because there is a part 2.
Yes,
and it's not as good as this one.
But yeah, they both get equal billing. That, like I mentioned at the start, the narration is really warm and fun, and it's like the kind of thing you could pick up if you've never read either hero. Like, if you're a massive Spider-Man fan, you could pick it up and learn everything you needed to know about Superman, and vice versa.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would. I can imagine it being your introduction to the other company.
Yes, absolutely. Which is obviously what they designed it for, you know. And it's
Yeah.
still, even with all this sort of weight on it and all these things that they had to do, we've got to give them equal time. We've got to introduce new readers to these characters. Blah blah blah. It still manages to be a really coherent, fun story.
Yeah, I think you can say it's by the numbers, but it's the first one, so it painted the numbers.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? It set the numbers.
Mm.
LaMar, your final thoughts on Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man. Before you go, JD says if this is crossover world and crossing can be read as X, this is Earth X. JD, shut up. Like, we know you love Earth X, okay? Maybe one day we'll get to it.
Yeah, we knew that was coming. You know.
Also, by the way, JD, I know you want to join us for Kingdom Come. So, set some time aside from your schedule so you can join us for Kingdom Come, okay? All right. Go on, LaMar.
Yeah, this comic, man, it's a wild ride, right? And it's funny, even though we've like you were saying, like we've been going through the comic and providing our own color commentary. The stuff that we say about this comic is because we love it. It's not like we're, oh man, this is garbage because of this. No, it's a part of the ride, and we're just pointing it out. But it's, if you haven't read it, go and read it. Because honestly, we're not really doing it justice. You have to take in the whole comic and go into the world that they created and just enjoy yourself, man. If you're a Spider-Man fan, you're not going to be let down by this, because despite the fact that, you just have to understand this is Superman we're talking about, right? So, but no, Spider-Man was great in this comic. I mean, it's one of the most Spider-Man comics you'll ever read, you know. Yeah, and matter of fact, probably when we get off here, man, I'm probably cause I'm gonna have some lunch, and I'm probably gonna read this again, and I've read it a million times. The first time I read it was about 40 years ago, and I still read it. So
Yeah, I still pull
that's
it
a
out.
testament to it. Yeah. I read it a few times a year. You know.
I will say, there is 4 stories in this collection, which is Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man and Superman, with Superman and Spider-Man, the Heroes in the Holocaust, which is written by Jim Shooter and penciled by John Buscema. It's not as good as the first one, and I think it's because it takes itself a little too seriously.
Yeah.
There is the Hulk and Batman, which is really good. It's got Garcia Lopez on art. I still think it's not as good as the first one, as Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man. And then there is the Uncanny X-Men, the New Teen Titans, which seems to be everybody's favorite because it was the 2 biggest books at the time. And I still think it's not as good as Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
By the way, if you want to talk about lopsided, that crossover, that is an X-Men story featuring the Teen Titans.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's basically X-Men versus Darkseid, isn't it? Really?
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
That's basically what it is with guest star. You know who has the best outing of the whole Teen Titans roster in that entire series, in that entire comic? It's Deathstroke the Terminator.
That's true.
And he's the bad guy. So I think pick it up. It is, it was not the first time Marvel and DC collaborated. That was a Wizard of Oz adaptation, but this was the first DC Marvel crossover, and there hasn't been one since 2004 at this point with JLA Avengers. So now is the time to go back, because you're not going to get new ones, to read your DC Marvel crossovers. So any final thoughts before we close?
Just to agree with you, it is probably the best one of all of the DC Marvel crossovers they've done. Even like JLA Avengers, I absolutely love it. but I think there'll always be a special place in my heart for Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man.
LaMar.
Yeah, I agree. The JLA Avengers, it's a different thing, to me. But with this, it's just something. I think probably just because it's just two superheroes and in their respective worlds, it draws you in a little quicker, right? So, because there's less to take in and figure out. It's just Superman shows up, Spider-Man shows up, and then foolishness ensues, right? That's pretty easy for you to get yourself into.
It's literally all you need.
Yeah, you don't need anything else. There's no extrapolation necessary. You just jump in and hold on. But yeah, this one I just think it's a special story. I do. So
I agree.
Yeah, and I agree. It's the best out of all the ones in that collection. And there's some good stories in that collection.
Yeah, they're all good stories.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining the first ever Comics Cube live stream. We're very happy for you guys to join us. We will talk about whether or not we should do more of these. Click like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media and all that, so you can be aware of whenever we have new episodes up, or if you just want to follow our ramblings. Usually when Paul gets in trouble on Twitter. So. Take care, everyone. Like, share, and subscribe. Click the little bell button for your notifications. Thank you. Okay.